Good morning, or whatever time it is when you're watching this video. It's our first sort of content video of this semester. We're a couple days into the first week. Hopefully you've read the Bradstreet poems, before you're watching these videos. I'll be talking about Anne Bradstreet and Phyllis Wheatley in this video. The videos are going to have spoilers, so I prefer that you do all of the reading yourself first, so you can form your own ideas, and then you can read or view the videos and sort of, see what I'm thinking, which is by no means definitive. I'm just thinking out loud and sort of drawing on my experiences in the past as a literature student, all of my education. But there's room for interpretation in all of these things. So I'm going to give you my take, and I might present sort of opposing views from time to time. We're going to start with Anne Bradstreet. She's the first poet listed. I find her to be a really interesting figure because she's not born in the United States. At this point, there is no United States. The first poems you see here published in like 1650. So 100 years easily before the founding of the United States. I'm going to look at section 5 of the prologue specifically. I'm looking at these poems because, I like to look at literature and poetry in and of itself. I think it's interesting without context, but a lot of times, poetry does have a relevance to our culture. And some of these poems that we're going to talk about, this part of this poem and then part of the Phyllis Wheatley poem, they reveal a lot about the culture and the sort of historical scene of the time. So I'll read section 5 from the prologue. It's on page 2 of your book, which is the monster Oxford book, which is awesome. So section 5. I am obnoxious to each carping tongue who says my hand a needle better fits. A poet's pen all scorn I should thus wrong. For such despite they cast on female wits. If what I do prove well it won't advance, they'll say it's stolen or else it was by chance. What do you make of that? What sort of attitude do we think this portray? What kind of attitude do people have towards women in this time, especially towards women writers? I would say it's not too flattering, right? I am obnoxious to each carping tongue. If what I do prove well, it won't advance. They'll say it's stolen or else it was by chance. In other words, saying, if I, Anne Bradstreet, by chance, happen to write a good poem or publish a good poem, one, I didn't write it myself, I stole it from someone else, or two, it was completely luck that contributed to it and it was no skill, no sort of talent of any kind. So it doesn't paint a very flattering picture. I find it really interesting that, in a country that's sort of male-dominated, it's been male-dominated from the beginning, we're trying to get away from that, but I think we'd say that it's still sort of male-skewed, that Anne Bradstreet is our first recognized American poet. I always find that interesting. And that she's not born in America, or, in what would later be America. She comes from England. Her first poems are published in England against her will, also kind of interesting. The fact that she doesn't really have agency over her own work sort of contributes to the view of, how people thought of women at the time. So I think there's, her poetry is interesting in and of itself, but I think it also casts light on the historical context of the time. And so too does the poem by Phyllis Wheatley. It's on page 13. It's called On Being Brought from Africa to America because she was of course, a slave at one point. And I'll read this one, it's pretty quick. And also was published in 1773 before the founding of the United States proper. On Being Brought from Africa to America. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember Christians, Negroes black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. Let's examine that first line. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land. Well, if Phyllis Wheatley is a black woman, former slave, what do you think really brought her from her pagan land to America, or the Americas? I don't think it was mercy. No, I don't. I think she's sort of imposing that view or that lens on it from her point of view at that time. But no, she was brought over as part of the slave trade, right? And it's another interesting thing that, Phyllis Wheatley, Anne Bradstreet is a white female, and now we have Phyllis Wheatley, a black female. And they're major figures in the early American poetry scene. Not that there's a huge American poetry scene this early on, but they're sort of the big names as the country is beginning to form. And these two poems sort of reveal a lot about what's going on in the country. And it's interesting to see the take on the culture that they live in. Anne Bradstreet's pretty honest. She says, if I publish a poem, people think it's stolen or that it's by luck. Phyllis Wheatley, I think she's being ironic. She's saying it was mercy that brought me from my pagan land in a way because, it allowed her to find Christianity, which sort of enriched her life. But it's also a little bit ironic, right? Because it wasn't really, in a literal sense, that's not true. In a figurative sense, maybe she's imposing this onto her past, but it's not true. So I find these two poems and these two figures really interesting because they're women, because Phyllis Wheatley was a former slave, and they're some of the building blocks of the American poetry scene. So that's who's getting us started off this semester and this week.